I come from a family of blacksmith. My name is Fayerman, in German Feuermann, which means man of fire, apparently describing the profession of our family. My grandfather, John, was very enterprising and started a manufacturing operation. So when I returned back from the war, I found out that all the schools were closed for Polish citizens. I no longer could go to school. So I asked my father if he could use me in his business. And he said, yes, you have a choice. You can work with me in the office or go to work with your grandfather in the factory. And I made my first best decision in life. I said, I want to work with my grandfather. Well, my grandfather was so proud to show the youngest member of the family the trade of the family for many years and taught me how to become a blacksmith. When I learned the trade, he turned me over to the tool makers, which is a very important part of manufacturing operation. Every metal manufacturer considered tools as the heart of the business. So I learned how to make tools. In the meantime, war progressed. America entered the war and began destroying and bombarding very many of the western cities in the western part of Germany. Hitler incorporated this part of land, which now again belonged to Germany, and we as Poles lost all our rights as citizens. We are sort of second-class citizens in our own country. And for that reason, we're not allowed to operate a business without a supervision of a German citizen. And there was a Treuhändler, a supervisor, that was appointed to take charge of our company. On the beginning, we had a very good relation with him. However, as time progressed and he has learned more about the business, he became very antagonistic, and we realized that we have got an enemy in our midst. Also, I don't know if you realize that before World War II, Poland had the largest Jewish population of any European country. Poland, over 33 million, had over 6 million Jews. And Hitler, however, declared Germany, the Judenrein, free of Jews. And all the Jews from our town were expelled. In many cities, majority of population was really Jewish, and our town was no exception. About 70% of the population were of Jewish descent. And the city nearly became empty. Therefore, the government decided to resettle most of the citizens that lost their properties in the western part of Germany to the eastern part. Of course, for that they needed labor to clean the houses and make them sort of acceptable for the Germans to occupy. And for this reason, they created a forced labor camp. During the war, every German city had at least one, and some of them several, forced labor camps. To fill up the camps, they simply will arrest individuals on the street, asking them for the documents. And if these documents, if they were not German citizens, they were simply arrested right on the spot. Men and women were taken to that camp. One Sunday morning, police knocked on our door and arrested my family. I lived there with my father, my uncle, and my mother. We assumed that this was the job of a supervisor who really became so antagonistic and wanted to get rid of us, and he found a good opportunity to do so. We were supervised in this camp, which was called Kamionka, by police. The police officer, the commandant, was a fairly easy fellow to live with, and the atmosphere resembled Stalag 17. Most of the guards became friendly, and we had a pretty good coexistence. Work was not difficult, and food was very reasonable. However, eventually we finished all the work, all the houses were clean, the Germans were arriving, and therefore the commandant told us that we had to be moved to another camp. And fortunately, again, we lived there about 30 miles, 35 miles north of Auschwitz, and our camp was taken to Auschwitz. We were loaded into cattle cars, and the train was taken into the camp of Auschwitz. I don't think I'll ever forget my arrival to Auschwitz. As we arrived into the camp itself, the doors were flung open. We were told to leave the train, and the men and women were separated. My mother went to stand with the women. I went with my father and my uncle. In a close distance, there was a German officer who motioned us to come to him, and as we approached him, he told us, stay to the right. Well, any youngster or older individual, however, told, do not stand with these men, stand aside. There were trucks here. They'll be coming very shortly to take you over to the camp. Well, eventually I found out later on that the trucks did come. The trucks did come and took all these people to the guest chambers. Only healthy individuals, men and women, were allowed to enter the camp. By the time this was over, it got a little bit dark. It rained. Poland is a cold and wet country. I remember walking on a slippery road. On both sides there were barbed wires with towers, and its soldiers stood with the guns. In the distance there were chimneys belching fire. There was a smoke hanging over the camp. Smell of burnt human flesh and air. If anyone can imagine being in a purgatory, most probably that's how purgatory must look. By the time we got to this famous gate, Arbeitsmarkt, we were told it's too late to get us into the camp. We'll spend the night in one of the buildings, and the following day we'll be inducted into the camp. The last night I slept with my father on the floor in a large hall. My father embraced me and said, you know, Severin, imagine the bandits have attacked us. They may kill us, they may not. If you ever survive, let's meet in Salzburg in your grandmother's home. I agreed to do so if we survive. Early in the morning we were awakened, and then we told to put all the money and jewelry that we had on the table. I had a billfold and a wristwatch, which I left on the table. Then we stepped to the next building where there were other prisoners with shaving equipment that shaved all the hair on my body except for eyebrows and eyelashes. I got a number tattooed on my left forearm. I got a towel, a piece of soap, and entered into showers. After being showered, the prison garb was issued. There were pajamas, blue and gray stripes, a round cap without visor, wooden shoes, and a pair of socks with it, and then a bowl and a cup and a saucer. With this, I was introduced into a camp called quarantine camp. Quarantine camp was created in order to test the ability of the prisoners to do very hard work with very little food. Who could not survive was simply eliminated, as I described the selection before, and only strong individuals continued to work. Maybe the best way for me to describe the life in Auschwitz is to tell you what was a day like in the life of a prisoner. We slept in the long buildings, like rectangular buildings, about 750 prisoners per building, on the shelvings, wooden shelvings, 3 high. On each shelving, 5 prisoners slept on wooden slats. There was a mattress, straw mattress underneath us. Each one was issued a blanket to cover up. For pillow, I took my clothes off and rolled it up and used it as pillow. We awakened very early in the morning. It was still dark, and breakfast was served. Breakfast consisted of lukewarm arable tea, that's all for breakfast. With this, step outside and form working brigades. I was assigned to digging trenches. A lot of trenches were required in Auschwitz because the crematorium operated 24 hours a day. 1,100,000 people were gassed and cremated in Auschwitz. So, of course, tremendous amount of ashes and human remains which were not burned had to be buried. And for that reason, we were to dig trenches. For tools, all we received was pickaxes, wheelbarrows, and shovels. We were surrounded by guards that pushed us and rushed us. Sometimes we had to run from one position to another. There was never enough work done, never any thank you for it. To the contrary, if we couldn't work hard enough, we were severely beaten. And we worked like this until about noon. At noon, lunch was served.